What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. My name is Adam. I am your host, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about a trend I am seeing within cards and if there is an opportunity for you to get in. There's sort of an interesting trend that I'm seeing in cards right now, and the reason I'm saying cards instead of sports cards is because we're seeing a lot of popularity in markets that aren't necessarily sports. And I know if you clicked on this video, you probably are thinking that I'm only going to be talking about Marvel, but I think there aren't only Marvel cards that are kind of going up in price, and this trend specifically that I'm seeing. It doesn't just apply to Marvel. If you have been on Clubhouse, and if you haven't, I think it's definitely an interesting place to check out if you are trying to learn about sports cards, because there's always sports cards rooms, I guess they call them, in there that are talking about this type of stuff. And something that I've always tried to chime in and talk about is, I think what we're seeing right now with like Marvel, we're seeing like Harry Potter is sort of coming into the mix. I think we're seeing in tennis and golf, because those are sports, but still kind of in the same realm of conversation that are like secondary markets. I think what we're seeing right now is that people are prospecting markets, and prospecting has always been sort of one of the big ecosystems within sports cards, and baseball prospecting is the biggest probably of them all. I think you don't really see college cards with Panini or Upper Deck or maybe Leaf even, maybe. You don't really see those types of markets being the primary market within a sport, and I think you could argue that the Bowman Chrome market, which is all prospecting, is just as big of a market as the regular Topps flagship rookies or Topps Chrome or whatever type of sets within that, within those rookie year cards. And I think it's not necessarily wrong. And wrong from the sense that, like, if you're trying to get into it, I would say just be careful that you're not spending, and this is kind of my advice for anything that you're buying that's an investment or anything that you're buying within the industry, is make sure you're not buying into something just because other people are talking about it, and make sure you're not buying into something just because. I think that's sort of what people are doing. And I mean, I think people like Marvel, and I think people like some of these other cards that I'm hearing about and some of these other alternative markets. I think you could also maybe say Fortnite is in that conversation. I think I've seen some trends with Fortnite cards, the Series 1 cards being more popular than Series 2. Series 1 releasing last year, Series 2 releasing in 2020. Well, so 2020 and then 2019 was Series 1. But I think, the prospecting aspect of sports cards is what I think a lot of people like doing. And I think, people maybe aren't as right now, at least, maybe people are trying to make the decision whether they want to try and prospect players or if that's going to be a little bit too risky, like we did see over the past 3-4 months. And I think it's because a lot of people were talking about, a lot of content creators, a lot of people within the industry have been talking about the Jordans, the Kobes, the LeBrons. Those have seen a fairly decent size increase in pricing. And I think sort of what we're seeing is that people are looking at those cards, and then they're going to these other markets to find who are the most popular, Marvel characters, or who's the most popular golfer, which was Tiger Woods. And I think we saw that with the documentary. I think Tiger Woods is a little bit different. And Serena also, we saw a very significant increase. I mean, when I was looking into those cards, just to put this into a little bit perspective, I was looking into those cards probably October of 2019. I think February of last year I bought some of them, and then I sold some of them recently because the price was even if it goes higher, I'm all right with whatever I sold it for, because it's like I just don't see how you can be disappointed with what I ended up making on these cards. But I think people are looking at that, and it may even be the reason why Pokemon is kind of soaring up the rankings of most expensive cards as well, is that people are trying to prospect markets in general, and I think it could be because of what happened with soccer, and then sort of what happened with golf, and then sort of what's happening with tennis, but mainly soccer, because I think what we saw with soccer over in 2020, and I saw it in 2019, and there was an increase in 2019 into 2020, and then 2020 it really just kind of skyrocketed. But I think we saw a whole market that had so much potential finally get some recognition. So I think that's sort of what's happening with like Marvel and some of these other cards. And I think it's definitely important to talk about with these specific markets. This is what happened with soccer, and this is what's going to happen with Marvel, and this is what's going to happen with every market that has something that you're going to hear people call as low population. And I think the low population of some cards is a big deal. Like, I've talked about this, I don't remember what, I think I was on the Stacking Slabs podcast where I was talking about vintage, and one of the points that I brought up is that vintage, the population report is all that matters with vintage, but with modern cards, it doesn't matter at all. So I think when you're looking at some of these low population markets, especially with these Marvel cards, and I think this is kind of where I think people should be the most cautious when they're buying them. Like, if you're buying the raw card, and obviously everyone's limit is a little bit different. Like, if you're buying the raw card or you're buying a graded card, buying because they have low populations may not necessarily be the best strategy, because some of the Marvel cards that have gone up pretty significantly in price are some of the 1990 Marvel set that they came out with. So that set's coming out in the 90s. Just think about all of the other sets and think about the industry in the 90s. And it's the same with like the Tiger Woods card, for example. That's a little bit later on. That was in 2001, but still, that card was still kind of part of this like crazy time period where there were a lot of products. But if you think about the 1990s, it was right in the middle of the junk wax era, the 1990 Marvel cards at least. Right in the middle of the junk wax era, there's probably tons of these. There's probably tons of these boxes that people just didn't open. And I think it's very similar to, if you listen to the Mojo Break podcast, they talk about this all the time. They talk about how Prism was not popular in 2012 and 2013 with the first year, and then with Giannis's year, they were giving away this product because people didn't really want it. And I think it's probably similar with this Marvel product. Like, there's probably a ton of it that is unopened, that a year ago, people couldn't even give it away. Like, it wasn't even something that people wanted at all. And I don't necessarily think it's cards with Marvel and with that type of market. I definitely think it is going to be more comics. Now, comics is something that can get it's not something I've done a ton of research on. It's something I've done like a little bit of research on, so I'm not going to give you any tips or tricks in this video about comics at all, but I think, an interesting strategy that I would suggest looking into if you're looking into getting into comics is just going to be like what movies are coming up for Marvel or superhero movies, and then finding the comic that superhero or that character first was featured in. And I think that's an interesting strategy that I've looked into a little bit. And that's why you saw one of the first edition Batman comics, I believe was I think it was graded by CSG, I forget the exact name of the grading cards or the comic grading service, but I think it was a rated 94 in terms of the quality, and it sold for $2.2 million. And I think that's probably that's got to be one of the most expensive comics of all time. So you look at that and you say, that's one reason why people are kind of looking into the superhero kind of Marvel universe. Obviously, Batman is not Marvel, but like that type of superhero market. I think that's why people are looking into Marvel a little bit more. And I do think that once people start looking into it, that's when they realize that this is something that they're interested in. And that's what ends up leading to more people kind of getting in and more people being interested. And I think that with the low population, what is going to happen? And this is exactly what happened with Pokemon as well. People gain interest in the market, in the cards, in the product itself, and then they buy a bunch of the product, or they had a bunch of the product, and they send it into PSA, and then in 6 to 9 months, the population report of a lot of these Marvel cards are going to be 10, 20x, because like these cards with Pokemon, I'll use the Pokemon example and then I get back to Marvel, but with Pokemon, think about I'm imagining if you're into sports cards right now, you have a binder somewhere in your childhood house of all your Pokemon cards. There are millions upon millions of people who I think have these types of binders somewhere in their house. I did. I mean, when I was first getting back into cards, I wasn't really exactly into Pokemon as much as I was into sports cards. But I was talking to my dad about the cards, and my dad was like, "Oh, we still have the binder of the Pokemon cards," and we literally found this huge box with like tons of different sets, and like it had a bunch of not the first edition sets, but some of the base sets, like a holo Charizard. I don't think it wasn't a first edition holo Shadowless Charizard, but there was a holo Charizard in there. So think about the amount of other people that also kind of had these binders, and all the people that sent in their cards. So, and we are still like, I forget exactly when the Logan Paul the original Logan Paul box opening was, because he's doing it again through Golden Auctions, which I think is pretty cool. He did it, and that kind of grew the popularity. And I think I had seen the market kind of increase a little bit even before that. Like when I was opening all of these cards that I had, I was going through, and even some of the random base cards that I had, were worth like $3-4, and they were selling. Like the volume compared to some random sets within baseball or basketball, they were selling pretty well, and they were selling pretty easily. Like I didn't have to list it for there weren't like 1 or 2 listing of each of the cards. There were like 3 or 4, and sometimes even up to 10 listings that had sold each week. Like it wasn't really even super crazy to sell some random card. And I think people are trying to add these cards to their collection maybe, but I think what's going to happen with these Marvel cards as well is that people are opening the product right now and they're sending it to PSA, or they had boxes, or they had the product from 1990 and they are going to send it to PSA. So in, I think, 9 to 12 months from now, when people are getting these cards back from PSA, or if they send them another grade, make it back a little faster. But I think if they're sending them to PSA, there's going to be 10x the amount of population of these cards from Marvel, from Pokemon, and I think that's one thing that you should definitely be worried about. And I think the last point that I have here is that, like, you got to think these cards were these cards. Well, like, you got to think, why are these cards just going up? Like, because the 1990 product is 30 years old at this point. So, like, why are these cards randomly not randomly, but why are they becoming popular? And I think it's because people are trying to prospect the market, and the people who are getting on. Now, if you're getting any of these Marvel cards, or you're grading them, and you have them, and you send them for 5-day, and you can get them sold pretty quickly, I think you're going to have a first mover's advantage. That first mover's advantage may even be past the point where it's even realistic at this point, too, so you got to think about that. But so I just think that you got to look at why these cards weren't sent into PSA earlier. So I think it's definitely interesting to see people looking at different markets, and I think it's a good thing that there are people getting into different markets and kind of diversifying their portfolios a little bit. And I think this is the last point that I'm going to talk about. You just have to think about, like, the crossover between people who are interested in cards and then people who are interested in that market. Now, obviously, I honestly think if we were to compare markets, soccer and Marvel may be very similar because of the amount of people that are interested in Marvel, the amount of people that are interested in soccer. I don't know how, granted, I haven't done an immense amount of research on Marvel, but I think it's like a worldwide phenomenon for the most part. And Star Wars is another one, actually. Sorry, I should have mentioned that from the beginning. Star Wars is one of the original Star Wars sets. Now, those cards are from the 70s. So I think those cards have a little bit more potential than the 1990 Marvel cards. But you just have to think about, like, if you're looking at Marvel or Star Wars or golf or tennis, you have to look at the people who are interested in that subject or that thing. And then you have to look at the people who are interested in cards, because there probably is crossover, but you just have to be careful. And that was one thing that when I was talking to people when I was first looking into tennis, that's one thing that when I was talking about it, that was the thing that they were like, I don't know if there's ever going to be a market for tennis. Now, I think right now what we're seeing is that tennis is becoming more popular in cards, at least, because people are prospecting sports and types of cards. So is tennis going to be long-term a good investment? I don't necessarily know. I think, if you were buying tennis back in 2019 or 2018 and you're selling it now, I think you should just take the profit and maybe keep a couple of the cards just to hold on to. That's probably what I'm going to do. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't decided. Just make sure you're recognizing that there's probably other people who are also looking into these similar types of markets, in that, if you can buy and sell these cards, I think it's a good idea to take some of the profit and, again, put it into, the legends. That's kind of, I think, one of the main things that I've always suggested is that you should be putting a significant amount of money that you're making into assets that are not as risky as some of these newer prospecting markets. So, that's kind of the main points there. I just think it's, there are opportunities, and I think people are getting smarter, and I think people are just interested in other things as well. I don't think maybe maybe someone doesn't want to get into, like, Kobe's or all them, but at the same time, like, who wouldn't want to get into something that's a little bit more safe? I don't know. But those are just kind of my thoughts on what I'm seeing in that specific market. and why I think the alternative markets within cards are kind of going up. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and if you had any thoughts on what I talked about, make sure you leave it in the comments. I will see you in the next video.